Hello, YouTube! I don't know why you keep watching these videos. I'm not like the foremost authority on the metagame. What's like an embarrassing deck that I thought people would play? Like, I've got VS on here. That should show you I'm a pretty unserious individual. But I'm back again, and we are making another tier list video for the release of Duelist Nexus. For the purposes of coping, for the sake of completeness, you can also assume this is the exact list for the Soul Burner pack as well, because that is not changing a goddamn thing. Anyway, there's a lot of really cool new cards in Duelist Nexus, and a lot of people expect it will upend the metagame. I'm here to give you a week one analysis of what's going on. So 2 tier lists ago, we tried to be reactive, showing off what had been working based on a bunch of tournament results. And last time, we tried to be a little bit predictive in order to let you know what was going to be good before it was good. This time, we're going to have to meet in the middle and try and both use the week and a half of tournament results that we have under our belt, as well as make a little prognostication, get our Punxsutawney Phil on about what's going to be good in the upcoming format. Okay, before we get started, I just want to let you know I am being really conservative about what I consider tiered decks. If your terrible deck that does see metagame percentage and does win tournaments ends up in tier 3, I mean, that's the purpose, right? Like, tier 3 decks should be able to do well in tournament, right? I don't know why we all decided the tier 3 was a holding facility for bad decks. Like, let's begin at the top of tier 1. I think the best deck in the upcoming format is not KASHTIRA. That's shocking, right? I think it's Pearly. This is a weird position for Pearly to be in. Pearly was decent in previous formats. That's because it still had the capacity to take over the game, although you had to both draw a little well and basically play perfectly the entire time. While drawing a little well is less the name of the game now that they have the Pearly form of the Sleepy Memory, you do still have to pilot this deck really efficiently if you want to walk away with the W, and that's going to make a lot of players think this deck sucks. At the highest levels of competition, this is going to be, in my opinion, the best deck, but that also puts it in a really precarious position. Pearly's a deck that's insanely telegraphed. It's known what the deck does and what it attempts to do, and for that reason, it's also kind of easy to sideboard against. If you just missed the most recent Remote Duel Extravaganza, Pearly ended up in the finals against Labyrinth and just got Dimension Barriered twice. Cool. That said, I think this is one of those decks that, despite the amount of hate against it, will be able to play through it. It's got a lot of the ability to use its cards defensively, just put up blockers by activating the quick play spells and then make it to your turn and make a big ass Zeus and win the game. Oh, I see. You all are saying I'm coping because I didn't put KASHTIRA as number 1. Okay, KASHTIRA is number 2. All right, how about that? I'm putting KASHTIRA as the second best deck. Obviously, KASHTIRA is incredibly good. Most recent results of the Extravaganza show that it still has the capacity to top major events, and God, I think anything short of a ban list is going to be insufficient to stop this deck from being one of the best in the room. The weird part about this deck is that a lot of the cards that beat Pearly also have a lot of crossover against this thing. Things like Dimensional Barrier are really good, Calling Xyz. That said, they're a little less good. KASHTIRA is more than happy to just end on, like, Fenrir Pass and finagle their way into a turn 3, at which point they can just wipe you. Also, probably should be said that a lot of decks don't have the capacity to play through the Macrocosmos that is a Rise Heart, including Pearly, which has a really difficult time doing so. Not an impossible time. Renewed access to cards like Zeus mean that this deck does stand a fighting chance in a way that it didn't in the past, but, you know, I'm not going to pretend it's a good matchup. And we got one more in tier 1. Despite a pretty poor performance at the last Extravaganza, I am going to put Runic Sprite in tier 1. Okay, so I'm sorry for believing. I apologize for being who I am. I just know in my heart of hearts, Josh paid you off for this one. The check maybe has cleared. Let's talk about Runic Sprite. While Runic Sprite didn't have a fantastic weekend at the Extravaganza, it did have a fantastic weekend in terms of the events that were being held over the weekend at locals. And I hate to cite locals for metagame dominance, but here I am doing it anyway like a fucking moron. This deck didn't get a ton in Dune, but it didn't really need a ton. Runic Sprite is the core of a number of extremely good decks, most notably the Fur Hire strategy, which is just absolutely so good in the hands of a skilled pilot. They did also receive a singular card that I think we were absolutely wrong about, Click and Echo. It allows you to basically get hand knowledge of your opponent, which is really good when you have like a few very telegraphed negates like red and carrot. You like know what you have to be negating. I think we as a community have kind of slept on the power of hand knowledge, and I think a card that near guarantees you that knowledge is really strong and may just be what Runic Sprite needed to keep up with the other 2 tier 1 decks. Let's go to tier 2. Tier 2. First deck isn't too surprising. It is Labyrinth. Labyrinth is a strange deck. Last format, I was pretty sure it was the top 3 strategy, and then it absolutely face planted at 2 consecutive WCQs, so I wasn't really sure anymore. The thing about Labyrinth is that they do have a significant amount of cards that just win the game on the spot. Eradicator does a pretty good job of just ending the game, as does Dimensional Barrier, as does a ton of Lingering Floodgates you can't even really interact with, etc., etc. But it also has the capacity to brick, and it also has a pretty big weakness to hand traps that are good against the other decks that are the majority of tier 1. It also gets really bad post-board. Once your opponent knows what you are doing, they can board accordingly, and as a result, you are going to have a rough time, sans like literally just hitting EEV back-to-back. You know, this deck's good. I think it's powerful. It had a great showing at the Extravaganza, but I think it's gonna be a lot less powerful as people figure out what they want to be doing in this format, and week 1 cards like Dimensional Barrier become less strong. The other deck I think is in tier 2 is Dragon Link. All right, I'm coping. I'm completely aware I'm coping. Dragon Link is so good right now. Come on, be cool. So Dragon Link's got a couple of things going for it. Firstly, it had a really good WCQ season. As far as clearing goes, it didn't exactly get out of Top Cut to the degree that it needed to for me to take it super seriously, but it was around. The deck's got a couple of different builds now and is still undergoing a lot of theory crafting in terms of what people actually want to end on, because there's such an unbelievable array of extenders that you really can just pick your poison. The one that I like the most is the one that's playing Assault Synchron. I think that card's really good. Theoretically, they could also play Revolution Synchron and like use it to pivot between field spells or something ridiculous. I don't think that's really as likely. I think the thing that's keeping a lot of people off of Dragon Link is that it's boring as shit. It is so goddamn boring. But I think that a lot of people who have been playing this deck for a long time are going to see a lot of success in this upcoming format just because of how flexible, powerful, and just flexible and powerful it is. Also, some decks just can't be Borland. That's nice. And now, tier 3. You all can just type the hate comments now. I know what you're going to write. I know what's going to be down there. I don't even have to scroll. I'm familiar with your whining. Branded is just... Did anything change in Branded? I was talking to someone about the new Branded lines, and they were walking me through them, and all of them were like, so after you Branded Fusion, I was like, yeah, like, stop right there, you know? The deck still has a lot of raw power in it, despite the fact that now brews look more like a Trinity deck than the Dragon Link brews do. And it does have the capacity to do a bunch of unfair stuff like Labyrinth, where it just ends the game on the spot. You can use Sanctifier in order to set up the gimmick puppet thing, although it's a higher investment. And it also has the ability to dodge a couple of specific pieces of interaction. Non-Ash hand traps got a lot less good after people started figuring out how you could use Cartesia to dodge specific things. But at the end of the day, you kind of do need to be resolving Branded Fusion, or you are in a pickle. And that's not a fantastic place to be. Second deck in tier 3, and this one I permit you to make fun of me for. I have been wrong about this deck in the past. I have been very wrong about it. I'm ready to be wrong about it again. Here it is. Marincess. Okay, so Marincess had an insane weekend at the Extravaganza. It is really shockingly good. It's a combination of like hand traps being really important because 2 hand traps is like pretty good against the Pearly setup, and they're very cute. In the past, Marincess had a good weekend right before I put out a tier list, and I said that Marincess was a deck to look out for, and then it completely flopped upon the YCS for which I made the tier list. I'm ready to be that wrong again. I'm just gonna keep saying this deck is decent until I fucking collapse. Who's gonna prove me wrong? It's going to get 1 top every format until the end of time. All right, now let's move on to Rogue. First and foremost, I guess I'll put Rescue Ace here. Okay, so I built this deck because I thought it was fun and good, and I am reticent to tell you that it is neither fun nor good. Rescue Ace is fine. It's like okay. Its gameplay loop is telegraphed and repeatable to a degree, provided you can find the field spell and put all the cards back and then do it again. But it's not really exactly where you want to be. The turn 1 setup is incredibly interruptible. If you don't draw super well, you can interact with the Hydrant, which just wins you the game on the spot. Despite the fact that you're putting up 4 cards in the back row, there are a lot of decks, primarily KASHTIRA and the Zeus Factory that is Pearly, and Runic Sprite, which can just extend to infinity anyway, that can play through setups like that. And the deck doesn't have like a ton of offensive capability. Like a lot of the time you get to parity and then you're able to resolve Turbulence, but it doesn't immediately win you the game. Like you have to be winning for another turn and a half. And if the reason your opponent wasn't able to put up a board that could resist that was because they have a bunch of hard ones per turns in their hand and not because they ran out of material, then you might actually just straight up lose anyway. That's kind of really frequent in a format that includes KASHTIRA Fenrir. And finally, it's got a huge weakness in back row. It can't. It's clear that a lot of this deck's strength is the fact that in the OCG they decided to hit everything with a pulse, and they also have max illegal. Next up, Mannadium. Been getting a lot of hate for saying this deck is mid. I will continue to do it. Mannadium is mid as all hell. This is one of those decks that like really looks good if the only people you're subscribed to are like Lithium. Like in a world where your opponent never interacts with you in any sort of meaningful capacity, you will probably die of dehydration from cumming yourself before you'll lose a game with this strategy. But in reality, the deck just kind of folds to everything. All of the lingering floodgates that stop better decks, or at least slow them down, like literally lose you the entire match. I was told by a lot of people that once they got the additional ball and revolution synchron, they would be able to start converting, but that didn't happen in the OCG. And in the TCG, people are even considering like not playing revolution synchron at all because the deck list is too tight. Everything's a 2-card combo, which doesn't bode particularly well. And the end boards are interruptible in ways that are frustrating, like having a way to out like a big ass synchron that you've made after being hand trapped once turns off not only the negate that is that synchro, but also the back row that like has to have a synchro on field in order to interact with it. It's just like, it's okay. It's fine. It's just like a bricky fuck off combo deck. And there's like 4 bricky fuck off combo decks that are less bricky and more of a fuck off combo deck above it. Okay, exact same problem on Synchron. A lot of people were trying to pill me on the fact that Synchron's really good now that they have Revolution Synchron, and I agree that that does change some stuff, but it doesn't resolve the largest issue, which is that you have to have Junk Speeder resolve or you lose the game on the spot. A lot of the reason that this deck had a lot of individual power, even in games in which Junk Speeder was negated, is because it had access to Chaos Ruler, which still gets you to a lot of your plays in this deck specifically. We ain't got that. There are some hands that can make Speeder towers, but there are a lot of hands that do nothing. And out of the board, I feel like it's just going to lose to everything anyway. Like you put up a million negates, all concentrated on monsters. Guess what? People are playing Dark Ruler no more in order to beat KASHTIRA Rise Heart. So you might as well go game 2. The thing that's freaking me out is what chat has identified, which is you can do the Crimson Dragon combo in here. And like, ooh, Hot Red Dragon Archfiend King Calamity is a very scary card. If your opponent draws nothing, like that's going to be crazy, right? God, I hate to do this. Next up is fucking... What a bad couple of months it's been for MathMech. We didn't even get the 1 week where it was randomly the best deck this time. It's just already ass. So MathMech is in a weird position in that it loses to literally everything on this tier list in some capacity. Decks like KASHTIRA have cards with so much individual utility concentrated in single monsters that they can push through something like a Super Factorial by threatening it without having to commit to the board. Decks like Marincess get to play cards like Droll and Lockbird that just read win the game versus this strategy. You get to jam Bestials into Dragon Link's main and most of these guys' sideboards. And a lot of these decks like Labyrinth and Branded don't give a fuck if you make a big ass access code on turn 3. That shit's not resolving. We'll always have Pode format. I mean, like 2 weeks of Pode format. Next up. Man, I don't know what to do with Sword Soul. Sword Soul is just Sword Soul, baby. It's been doing the same thing for like 2 years at this point. The thing that it does is really strong. There have been no hits to the strategy, so I can't even pretend like things got worse. It's just kind of getting crept slowly. It's a good deck. You know, I'm not going to pretend like it's not a good deck. I wouldn't bring it to a tournament, but, you know, I'm fucking bad, so who cares? Has Sword Soul gotten anything in the last 2 years? Older? All right, last one I'm putting in Rogue. This one may actually be Cope, but Infernoble. So Infernoble had an insane pre-release weekend. The first weekend of Dune where the cards were technically legal, but you couldn't theoretically get them all because they weren't sellable by sellers yet. This deck swept a lot of local tournaments. This guy's cool. Charlemagne is nice. By the way, I'm calling this guy Charlemagne. He's cool. Charlemagne is nice. The deck plays in a way that's like way more consistent, way more interesting than it did in the past. But unfortunately, the way that it plays is not as unfair as it did in the past, where it got to rip a bunch of cards out of your hand, which means that it's a lot easier to beat. But the fact that it's playable at all is really shocking. iSold is still legal for some reason, so, make use of it. And now to Has Potential. So this time I'm using Has Potential as a place where you actually put decks that has potential instead of a dog shit holding facility, and we're beginning with Rika. Listen, I don't get Rika. Rika just never converts. It just does not have the tops. Unless your name is exactly Jess, who can't be touched on this fucking strategy. I'm ready to put this in Has Potential, and then that motherfucker wins Worlds, all right? I'm prepared. Jessica Robinson is to Rika what Matt Nass was to KCI. Exactly. Next up, Chimera. So the illusion stuff is really interesting. It's good. I don't feel like it's good enough to be its own deck yet. But the cards all read crazy. Like, they read Search and Illusion. You can't print that on a card. As is, people are experimenting it in a number of decks that already fusion summon, which is neat and interesting. But I think the deck is going to have more legs, obviously, as more illusions get released and more people tinker with the strategy as a splash. Their fusion spell is ridiculously broken. Their searchers are ridiculously cool. Chat's right, give it a year. Unchained. Unchained seems nuts. Am I crazy? Every time I read the new Unchained cards, I go, they really printed that on a card. Wow, that's unbelievable. It's on a card, and it's legal, and I can show up to a tournament and play it. And then you look at the results, and it just doesn't do anything. I'm a little confused about this one. The only thing I can fathom is that it's a little too telegraphed, and a bunch of decks like Sprite and KASHTIRA can really take advantage of that in a way that fucking sucks for them. Lab Unchained is the best variant in the OCG right now. Well, if you're playing Lab, just play Lab, Next up, Geist. All right, I'm going to be real with you. I have no idea what the new Geist cards do. I read them and I watched a couple of videos that like show off the end boards, and I thought that's really cool, but I don't think this deck is very good at all. I think that it is interesting, and in a best of all possible worlds, like a bunch of the decks above it, it can set up a really powerful board, provided you draw like one or two specific cards. But like needing to open Ritual Beast, Tamer, Elder, and Canahawk is not really where you want to be in 2023. It feels like a deck that could really fuck you up if you're like unprepared for it entirely. So I would say like learn the strategy and know what you have to do to stop it and pray your opponent doesn't high roll. But I'm not super concerned about it. Next up. Okay. So you got to hear me out. So Tierlist was terrible in the OCG, but then they released Revolution Synchron, and all of a sudden it's the best deck again. Okay, so this shit is not good. I'm not going to pretend that it's good. A lot of people were telling me, are you excited to play Tierlist again? It's going to be as powerful as it was in the OCG, and like, the reason that Revolution Synchron was so crazy in Tierlist in the OCG is because after you're done making Ancient Fairy Dragon, you can make Chaos Ruler, which they left legal, which at this point is the only thing keeping Tierlist together. You gotta imagine it as like a wife and a husband in an unhappy marriage and two kids that are failing all their classes, and like the dinner table that is held together with like glue and spit and dreams is Chaos Ruler. And somehow they are able to have a meal every night together. In the TCG, they're divorced. It's over. Rhinoheart eats in his room while playing CSGO. Next up. Man. Okay, so the argument for this one is that theoretically you can play Revolution Synchron to do the Crimson Dragon line, which makes Archfiend King Calamity. But that is ass, and it's something that Manadium can do as well. And this deck can't even do anything with the Ancient Fairy Dragon because it can't play any fucking spell cards. It's bleak. The tools are there. Maybe someone can figure out something interesting to do with it, but until they do, it looks like it has potential to me. Nothing changed about VS. It's the exact same deck it was. It just turns out that that deck is nowhere near good enough. I put it up a lot higher in previous videos because I was coping. I will freely admit that now. Unfortunately, the existence of Maxi does wonders for this deck. It allows it to have an Earth monster in hand at all times, which turns a lot of its really powerful combos into much more consistent combos. Here, we don't have that. It's lost both its best defensive tool and its best enabler, and sometimes you just look at a handful of Fenrir and you go, why don't I just play KASHTIRA? And finally, Flu. I don't know. I just like to put Flu on these. I think the Flu's crazy. The 4th most represented deck in the EUWCQ's top cut, by the way. What is going on over there? What do they know that we don't? Robina is British, right? So maybe that was it. That's how I think the format's going to shake out. I know you all are calling me a coping monster, but I think this is pretty defensible with maybe 1 or 2 or 7 differences. Feel free to call me an idiot in the comments, and now I will entertain your comments above as to why X deck should be on there. Fire off some names, I'll tell you why they're not. Gold Pride. You know, Gold Pride probably should be on there. That's a bit of an oversight. I would probably put Gold Pride in Rogue. I am consistently impressed by Gold Pride. I played against it a number of times, and the games just felt like unwinnable, and I was like, wow, what an interesting strategy. Yeah, I could see Gold Pride being all right. The problem is its matchup spread is not particularly good. Sometimes you draw hands with the wrong half of the deck, and its power plays are not as powerful as the power plays of the decks above it. Dark World. Okay, the difference between Dark World being terrible and Dark World being tier 0 is not 1 copy of Dark Corridor. Dinomorphia. Yeah, I was wrong about that one, huh? Salamandrate. Okay, so the new Salamandrate cards that are coming out in the Soul Burner thing, they're good cards. They're good cards for a deck that doesn't exist. Salamandrate is a deck that makes like Baguska turn 1 and like Access Code turn 3, and all the good new cards conflict with that strategy. Exo Sister. I don't know, it could be around. Exo Sister is such a weird deck. Sometimes it feels like how like Gladiator Beast was just randomly topping until like 2013. Exo Sister could show up. We put it in has potential. But like I don't think it does have potential. I think we know what Exo Sister does. It just sometimes does it. Any Pendulum deck. Invoke Generator Synchron. Dire. You're in my brain is in exactly the same place. Shouts out to the individual who was able to get top 16 at the Extravaganza with Invoked Generator Synchron. Unbelievable brew. I hope that deck is good. I don't think it is. Hero? Hero could be on this list. I would probably put Hero in has potential. Hero now has like a really consistent mechanism by which it can set up the like favorite hero line and go for the cover card of fucking Pote, by the way. The problem is it needs a format in which that's good, in which Dark Law's good, in which Plasma's good, and which DPE is good. If all those conditions are satisfied, then the deck is quite strong. Live Twin? You can just assume that Runic Sprite is also Live Twin. Trap Trick? Trap Trick is like a monster combo deck masquerading as a back row deck, but unfortunately it has a really tough time going second in a way that Labyrinth doesn't, and it has a really hard time beating stuff that comes out of the board in a way that Labyrinth doesn't. Striker. Man, don't talk to me about Striker. God, I hope Striker is not still playable. I hope that Dragon Link is so popular that every single Striker player gets their Ray Bistield. Plunder Patrol. Are you serious? Marincess is only water monsters. That's the only reason. Otherwise, it'd be tier 0. Crystal Beast. I'm going to give Neshi a couple of weeks to figure out the Revolution Synchron Golden Rule line, and then we'll revisit Crystal Beast. Tistina. Oh, Vlad, can you throw up Tistina where it belongs? Dino, who are you? Peeps? Get the fuck out of here. Earth Machine. I mean, like, I don't want to include Earth Machine because, like, it's not fun having a tier 0 every time, right? Volcanic any good? No.